and we're about to see the royal hearse bringing the coffin through the arch. Line of, are those hussars?
So they're going to travel along A roads, which I think is interesting, rather than the motorway, to give presumably more people a chance to see the coffin before the Queen's finally laid to rest. So they're heading towards Windsor in the state hearse, designed by the Queen herself.
This great moment as she leaves London, which has been the seat of her reign for so long, that the King's lifeguard, just wishing her goodbye, set up by her father George VI, to head out to Windsor, passing such significant places, including Runnymede, where the Magna Carta was signed in 1215, the first ever laying down that the monarch was not above the law. And there the crowds wishing her a final goodbye. They've been lining up overnight. They've been there for hours just to say goodbye to their Queen and applaud her in her final journey.
We can start hearing the bells of Westminster Abbey tolling again, fully muffled, which only happens on the death of monarch.
I mean, just look at how many people have come out waiting after this week of events, more than a week, knowing that this will be the last time they actually see Queen's castle.
It's amazing to see how many people really want to play some small part in this, and whether that was traveling to Buckingham Palace to be there when her coffin arrived, whether that was waiting up to 24 hours to see the Queen as she was lying in state, or whether it is joining the hundreds of thousands along the streets of London today, watching her leave for the last time. We also came on the train to Windsor just now. Lots of people as well getting on the train from different stops, wanting to be here to welcome her as she arrives here.
It's so interesting when you think about days ago when the hearse was coming to Buckingham Palace for the first time from Scotland. You were out there in the crowds, of course. There was some scattered applause, particularly when the hearse entered Buckingham Palace, but the crowds were largely silent. There was a kind of, I think, a shock and surprise and a reverence. It's interesting now to hear almost everywhere now that the hearse goes, this building of applause. It seems like the mood has shifted in a sense over the last several days.
This is really the culmination, isn't it? It's been 10 days of mourning, 10 days of people trying to grapple with the new reality of life in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, without the Queen. And I think outside the Abbey today, we definitely felt the mood was somber. It was one of reverence.
Lovely to see flowers thrown out as well from the crowd. These people here are the ones who couldn't get into the central area to see the main procession, so they brought flowers and can't reach that point where you lay the flowers, so they're throwing them.
I should point out, in Windsor a short time ago, I was walking around and there was a public address announcement asking people not to throw flowers when the casket arrives.
Also interesting, you saw the King saluting to the Queen, who was head of the armed forces. One last salute. You've seen a bit of that. Also interesting to see Princess Anne get into this part of the motorcade on her own. Again, accompanying the coffin as she did all the way from Balmoral through Scotland down to England. And we always knew there would be a member of the royal family accompanying the coffin, but I think it's interesting that she's taken that role throughout this whole process as the person who was there when the Queen actually died. So this is where the cavalry are normally based, over in Knightsbridge, so they played a huge role in this, and officers come out who aren't involved in the processions today to pay their respects to their former boss.
Now, in the other vehicles, is it the many members of the royal family?
It's Princess Anne in one of them, and then separately you're going to have the royal family, again, yes, going down to Windsor, and all the other royal families from around the world going there, and the prime ministers from the realms.
But that's obviously in a separate motorcade, not this one.
And this is the route that the Queen took so often from Buckingham Palace to Windsor Castle, because it was her favourite weekend retreat. Often when we'd be all covering royal events together, we'd see the royal event end and the Queen would be off in her car to Windsor. She loved the peace, she loved the fact she could enjoy the space with her horses, and this route that she knew so well, that she was driven on so many times to her beloved Windsor Castle, she now takes, with Princess Anne accompanying her, past these waving crowds who are just so thrilled to be a part of it, to be a part of history. I've been chatting to some of the crowds who've been out there waiting, and they said they were determined, didn't matter what the weather was like, they were going to stay there and they were going to say goodbye to the Queen, really to thank her for her service. Not long after the Queen became Queen in the 50s, she said, I can't be like a king before, I can't be like a queen before, like Elizabeth I, the other queens regnant who were buried in Westminster Abbey, Anne, Mary I and Elizabeth I. She said, I can't be like them, I can't lead you to battle, I can't dispense justice. What I can do is give you my heart and my devotion to these old islands. And that really, that she said, as just a young woman, has been what she's tried to do throughout her reign. Give her heart and soul, commit herself absolutely. And this is what these people, the crowds, are recognising, how much she's sacrificed, how much she's worked, her sense of duty and service that the Archbishop of Canterbury was talking about in his sermon there at Westminster Abbey. Such a huge part of our history, and in the future people will look back on this 100, 200, 300 years time, the moment when the Queen left London, the Queen left her beloved capital and went to rest with her family.
So this journey is going to take about an hour to get to Windsor, and then about an hour after that, then the royal family will rejoin the procession to go through Windsor.
Wow, I mean, look at that crowd. Let's listen in. I think it was the Queen who commented some time ago that, she used to look out in the crowds and see faces of people, and then of course now in recent years you look out and you see cell phone cameras looking back at you, and that's so clearly everybody with their arms up, their cell phone cameras out.
One of the early changes of the new king actually was his security have been pushing people's phones down as he meets them, because they said that they want the members of the public to enjoy the moment. Interesting seeing that the coffin go past the Albert Hall and the Albert Memorial. Prince Albert, obviously the husband of Queen Victoria, who is the monarch that the Queen Elizabeth always referred herself to, always looked up to, and actually all of the royal families that we see arriving at Windsor a bit later on are all descended pretty much from Queen Victoria.
It was Albert who bought Balmoral for Queen Victoria.
Actually, they thought that it would remind Prince Albert of his beloved Coburg. The countryside would be similar, so that was their reasoning. And the Queen, like Victoria, loved Balmoral so much. She loved Scotland, the peace, and went on her final journey from there. And it's interesting for me to think about the crowds that line the streets for the coronation. And among the crowds actually was the future First Lady, Jacqueline Bouvier, future Jacqueline Kennedy. She was reporting on the Queen's coronation. And the question she was asking the public was, will Elizabeth be the last Queen? And that was the question she was asking, the article she was writing. And not long after she wrote the article, JFK proposed over the phone, and the rest was history. And such a significant moment.
Yeah, the Windsor Castle, which is...
Explain what we're looking at. That's Windsor Castle.
So this is the chapel within Windsor Castle, where so much history is laid. And you're actually going to see the Knights of the Garter, which is the highest order of chivalry, really taking a high position in the procession as it arrives there, because this is their home, and you'll see members of the royal family sitting in their named seats as Knights of the Garter. I think that'd be quite interesting once you get in there. But that's the, a really historic space, isn't it, where we see all the chivalry on full display, and with all the royal families of Europe and the world there. It's going to be extraordinary.
So I didn't realize how large Windsor Castle is. I mean, the acreage of it.
So people that have visited, it's an amazing place to visit. Actually, it's a really good tour to do. But people see that and they think it's enormous, but actually there's a whole other half to it, which is private, which is where the Queen lived and where she was able to ride freely and enjoy her time in the countryside there.
And she did spend a lot of time there during the pandemic. She was there for quite some time. Obviously, during the Second World War as well, I believe she was sent to live there for security reasons. Obviously, famously the terrible fire at Windsor Castle as well, which was such a tragedy for the family and for the Queen. She later spoke of that as being an annus horribilis.
Yeah, one of many things that were pretty horrible.
In a bad year.
It was not a good year for her.
You can see there actually in that central area of grass, they've laid all the flowers that people have laid. They've taken it in the castle and laid them out on the lawn. It looks absolutely stunning, very sort of tidy job. There you go.
Also, even before the war, throughout the 1930s, excuse me, she and her father, mother, and sister, they would spend a lot of time there as a family. And I think she was 14 when she finally went to the castle during World War II.
Yes, and St George's Chapel was it's such a significant place for the Queen. She's seen so many christenings, weddings, and the funeral of her beloved husband there. It was her own personal church. It was the church on her castle, and she, as Max was saying, the Order of the Garter is a very important ceremony we see every June. And when her father died, she wished to commission him his own special resting place. There's a lot of royals buried in St George's Chapel, Windsor, including Henry VIII, including Charles I, Henry VIII with his third wife, Jane Seymour. And the Queen wished her father to have his own resting place, so she built the George VI Chapel, commissioned in 1962, finished in 1969. And that special chapel, which we can see just on the side, is where the Queen will be laid to rest. Her father is there, her mother was moved there, and her sister, and her husband was just moved there, so she can be there. The royal family during the war, they call themselves us four, we four, and they're together again with Prince Philip.
If you're wondering if there's going to be enough room for the royal family at Windsor Castle, there's about 1,000 rooms and 13 acres, so plenty of room.
And it's unoccupied now.
Yeah. As crowds wait for the last chance to see the Queen's coffin pass by, we're going to talk to someone who was a guest at